The Hamarian soldier, clad in steel armor lacquered with the striking hues of blue and yellow, rode at the fore of his company. His trident helmet caught the pale sun, its jagged edges throwing erratic glints onto the blood-soaked ground. Beneath him, his horse moved cautiously, hooves sinking into the wet mire left by the carnage. Broken swords, shattered shields, and the splintered remains of overturned carriages jutted like the bones of a dying land. The stench of rot was thick, choking the air as they passed the bodies of soldiers and beasts alike, their forms contorted in the unnatural stillness of death. Around him, his 6 comrades rode in somber silence, their faces pale beneath their visors. They had seen such wreckage before, yet every battlefield bore a new weight of despair. The soldier's gauntleted hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sheathed blade, his eyes darting to the edges of the path, where scavengers, both human and otherwise, sulked in the shadows. The treacherous road to Barrowbourne demanded vigilance. Every rustle of wind through the tattered banners strewn in the dirt could be an ambush, every silhouette a lurking enemy. Their horses moved with a slow deliberation, careful not to trip on the debris strewn across their path. Blood seeped into the earth, pooling in stagnant trenches that whispered of the slaughter that had passed. A felled carriage, its wheels split and its cargo scattered, told a tale of a convoy caught unawares. The soldier could imagine the screams, the clashing steel, the sudden unyielding silence. He glanced at his companions, noting how their shoulders seemed heavier with each step forward, as though the grief of the fallen clung to them. The horizon offered no mercy. Barrowbourne loomed distant and grim, its towers black against the sky, promising only more of the same. The soldier's jaw tightened as he urged his horse onward. Whatever lay ahead, it was their duty to face it, though each step forward through the wreckage whispered that the path forward might well lead them to join the dead. The horses whickered nervously as the company pressed forward, their breasts puffing white in the cold air. The soldier at the front, his trident helmet gleaming like a warning beacon, raised his hand to halt the group. A stillness descended over the wreckage, broken only by the faint clinking of loose armor and the occasional groan of wood as the wind tested the ruined carriages. Something was wrong. "Do you hear that?" he murmured, his voice barely audible beneath the steel visor. One of his comrades, a stout man with a dented pauldron, frowned. "Hear what?" The soldier didn't reply. He urged his horse a step forward, his hand tightening on the shaft of his trident. The others followed suit, forming a cautious line, their horses snorting and pawing at the ground. The air was thick, oppressive, carrying the faintest echo of a sound that didn't belong, a faint wet rasp, like a dying breath tying to a clinging life. "Over there," said the rider on his left, pointing with a gauntleted hand to the remnants of a mangled cart. The wood was splintered, its cargo, barrels, sacks, and a once bright banner strewn across the muck. Blood pooled beneath it, seeping into the earth in thick congealed patches. The soldier dismounted carefully, his boots squelching in the mud. He signaled for 2 of his companions to stay mounted and guard their flank. The others fanned out, weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the desolate scene for any sign of movement with each step. The faint rasping sound grew louder. It was coming from beneath the cart. The soldier dropped to one knee, peering under the jagged remains of the vehicle. The sight made his stomach churn. A man was pinned beneath the broken wood, his torso twisted unnaturally. Blood leaked from a gash on his forehead, staining his matted hair, his lips trembling as though each breath was a battle. Still alive. "Help me lift this." 2 of the others joined him, shoving their weapons into the dirt and planting their shoulders against the weight of the cart. With a strained heave, they lifted the wreckage enough for the pinned man to be dragged free. He coughed wetly, his body shuddering as they laid him on the ground. "Who are you? What happened here?" the soldier asked, crouching beside him. His voice softened, but his tone was edged with the desperate need for answers. The man's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and wild. His lips moved, forming words that barely escaped as whispers. "Barrowbourne. Ambush." His head lolled to the side, his expression one of pure terror. "Not human. They came at night." "What came at night?" the soldier pressed, leaning closer. "Who attacked you?" The man gasped, clutching weakly at the soldier's arms. "The shadows. They moved like men, but they weren't. They took them, dragged them into the dark." The soldier felt the hairs on the neck stand on end. He glanced at his comrades, whose wary expressions mirrored his own unease. The man convulsed, choking on his neck's breast, before collapsing into a limp heap. His hand fell away, leaving a bloody smear on the soldier's bracer. Behind them, the horses stamped and whinnied in growing distress. The silence that followed was not the stillness of peace, but the shifting hush of a predator circling unseen. Then, faintly from the edges of the wreckage, a sound rose, a soft shuffling noise like feet dragging through the muck. The soldier stood swiftly, sword drawn. "Form up," he barked, his voice a sharp crack against the tension. His comrades obeyed without question, pulling their mount into a tight circle. As the shadows around them deepened, the sun's pale light dimmed unnaturally. The shuffling grew louder, closer. Whatever was taking this convoy wasn't finished yet. The air grew frigid as the shuffling sound multiplied, echoing off the wreckage. The soldier tightened his grip on the sword, his eyes scanning the darkening edges of the battlefield. Shadows flickered unnaturally against the splintered carts and fallen banners, moving like living things, writhing with a malice that didn't belong to the light. From the gloom, a figure emerged, humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were elongated, jointed at impossible angles, and its blackened skin glistened like oil under the weak sunlight. Empty pits where eyes should have been locked onto the group, with a rasping guttural growl escaping its twisted mouth. "Steady," the soldier barked, his voice cutting through the rising panic. The monster jerked forward, its gait erratic, the movements of a marionette pulled by invisible strings. From the shadows, more creatures emerged, their grotesque forms multiplying with every heartbeat. "By the gods," muttered one of the soldiers, his voice trembling. "Hold the line," the leader roared. "We ride out of this together, or not at all." The first shadow creature lunged, its arms flailing unnaturally. The soldier stepped forward to meet it, his trident swinging in a clean arc, the steel piercing through the creature's shoulder, sending a spray of ichor like black fluid splattered on the ground. The thing let out an unearthly screech but did not fall. Its severed arm writhed where it lay, the rest of the creature clawing madly at the soldier's shield. "Cut them down," he yelled, kicking the creature back as another lunged at its flank. The battlefield erupted into chaos. One of the riders thrust his spear into a shadow beast's chest, only for the creature to snap the shaft in half with a spasm of its limbs. Another soldier swung his axe through desperate precision, cleaving through the waist of a smaller creature. The beast crumpled but did not die. Its upper half clawed its way toward him with an unnatural speed. "We can't stay here," cried one of the men. "They're endless." The soldier knew he was right. More creatures spilled from the shadows, their jagged limbs clawing at the earth as they charged. Their numbers were growing, overwhelming. They needed to break free. "Form a wedge," he commanded, mounting his horse. "Riders to the front, break through and ride hard. Don't look back." The soldiers scrambled to obey, kicking their mounts into formation. The beasts swarmed closer, hissing and howling as they closed the circle. The leader urged his horse forward, leveling his trident. The beast beneath him reared, letting out a furious whinny, and then charged. The impact was brutal. The soldier's pike cut through the first shadow creature with a single powerful thrust, its body bursting into black mist. His horse trampled another, its hooves shattering the thing's grotesque skull. Behind him, his comrades followed, their mounts crashing through the writhing mass with a desperate force. Screams and the clash of steel filled the air as shadow creatures leaped and clawed at the fleeing riders, their malformed limbs reaching hungrily. One of the soldiers let out a cry as a creature latched onto his leg, dragging him from his saddle. He hit the ground hard, disappearing beneath a tide of black limbs. Another rider swung his trident down, severing a beast's head as it lunged at its horse's neck. The soldier in yellow and blue didn't look back, his focus fixed on the thinning line of creatures ahead. "Faster," he shouted, urging his horse to a gallop. The path cleared as the creatures hesitated, their movements disjointed as though some unseen force had called them back. The soldier's heart thundered as he broke free of the writhing darkness, his comrades close behind. The sun, weak and pale, greeted them on the other side, its light seeming to vanish the creatures back into the wreckage. The group slowed only when the shadow battlefield was far behind, their mounts snorting and trembling with exertion. The soldier turned to count his men. There were only 4 left. "We regroup at Barrowbourne," he said, his voice steel despite the ache in his chest. "No stopping, no delays. Whatever those things were, they're not done with us yet." The riders nodded grimly, spurred their mounts forward, the memory of the writhing shadows still clawing at their thoughts as they vanished into the mist. The pale outline of Barrowbourne's gray walls rose in the distance, its spires jagged and unwelcoming against the stormy horizon. The riders urged their horses harder, mud splattering as the hooves pounded the ground in a frantic rhythm. The soldier in yellow and blue led the charge, his gaze fixed on the iron gates ahead. Behind them, the shadows surged. "They're gaining," one of the riders shouted, glancing back to see the tide of shadow creatures rippling over the landscape. The thing moved unnaturally fast, their spindly limbs propelling them forward like spiders on a hunt. The air was filled with their hissing growls, the sound gnawing at the rider's nerves. "Keep going," barked the soldier, his voice barely audible over the hooves and howls. The gates of Barrowbourne were within sight now, but they were closed tight, and atop the battlements stood the Red Guard, fur-mantled musketeers armed with gleaming barrels and weary eyes. The soldier raised his hand, signaling his approach, and bellowed, "Open the gate, we're under attack." A captain in crimson armor leaned over the parapet, his wolf pelt mantle billowing in the wind. His voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. "State your business and name." "There's no time for this," the soldier shouted, the desperation in his tone clear. "Open the gate or we'll be torn apart." The captain hesitated, glancing past the riders to the dark swarm growing on the horizon. The beasts were close now, their forms slithering and lurching toward the galloping horses like a living tide. Another shadow beast emerged from the muck and leaped, its long arms outstretched for one of the riders. The soldier twisted in his saddle, raising his sword and slashing cleanly through the creature midair. It fell back into the swarm, shrieking as its body dissolved into black mist. "Open the gate," the soldier roared. The captain cursed under his breath and signaled to the guards. The musketeers braced their weapons against the wall's crenellations, their fur-lined coats rippling as they took aim. "Cover them," the captain bellowed. "On my mark. Fire." The sharp crack of muskets echoed through the air as bullets tore into the leading edge of the shadow creatures. Oh, some fell, their bodies bursting into plumes of darkness, but the swarm didn't slow. The creatures climbed over their fallen, their guttural howls rising to a deafening crescendo. The gates groaned as they began to open, their iron hinges straining. The soldiers inside shouted commands, forming a defensive line with pikes and spears ready. "Hurry," cried one of the Red Guard from above. The riders surged toward the narrowing gap, their horses' breaths labored as they sprinted with every ounce of their remaining strength. A shadow beast leaped, landing on the flank of one rider's horse. The beast clawed viciously. Black ichor sprang as the horse shrieked and faltered. Its rider was flung to the ground with a sickening thud. "Leave me," the fallen soldier cried, raising his sword as the shadows descended on him. His comrades had no choice but to obey, their horses tearing through the gate just as it slammed shut behind them. The soldier in yellow and blue slid off his horse, barking commands. "Reinforce the gate, they'll come for it next." The Red Guard wasted no time, pushing wooden braces and iron beams into place. Above, the musketeers reloaded, their faces grim as the shadow swarm battered against the walls. Long skeletal arms clawed at the stone, pulling the creatures upward. "On the walls, hold them back," shouted the captain, his musket leveled at the nearest shadow beast. He fired, the shot punching through its head, but another climbed into its place. The soldier joined the fight, dragging a pike from a nearby rack. He thrust it over the battlements, spearing a shadow beast before it could gain a foothold. The creature writhed, its claws raking the air before dissolving into mist. Below, the gates rattled as the swarm hammered against it, their howls reverberating through the stone. "They're not stopping," one guard muttered, his voice quivering. "They don't stop," the soldier growled, his helmet gleaming as he turned to face the captain. "We need fire." The captain nodded grimly and barked to his men. "Bring the alchemical oil. If they want to fight, we'll give them hell." Barrels were rolled up the wall, their pungent contents sloshing. The soldiers worked quickly, splashing the oil over the parapets and onto the writhing shadows below. A torchbearer stepped forward, his hand trembling as he lit the oil. The flames roared to life, casting the battlefield in an orange glow. The shadows screeched, their forms twisting and burning as the fire consumed them. For a moment, the tide seemed to waver. The swarm retreated slightly, the fire's light driving them into the dark. But the soldier knew this was only a reprieve. "They'll come again," he said, his voice low but firm. "And when they do, we better be ready." The captain nodded, his jaw tight. "Welcome to Barrowbourne, Arrow. I hope you brought more than courage." The soldier didn't reply, his gaze fixed on the dying shadows. The firefly danced across his trident helmet as he muttered under his breath, "This is only the beginning."